You're listening to the Feed Your Wild podcast, a conscious lifestyle show about all things nourishing for your body, mind, and soul. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join me for candid conversations with changemakers, exploring health and wellness, food as medicine, intuition and spirituality, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and feed all parts of your wild self. Hello, welcome back to Feed Your Wild, and welcome to part 2 of this wild pregnancy journey series. This is number 2 of 2 episodes. The first episode I released last week that really focused more on the physical aspect of things, diet, nutrition, supplements, lots of resources, body movement, all of that good stuff. If you haven't heard it and it is intriguing to you, I recommend going back and taking a listen. And I answer a lot of questions that I had received around just my own preparatory process when it came to pregnancy. So in this episode, I am speaking to the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual aspects of my wild pregnancy journey. And again, answering a lot of the questions that I received, which I feel I actually received more questions and interest with regards to the spiritual aspects. So I'm going to speak into that and my own personal experience. Again, I do want to make a gentle disclaimer that this is my personal experience. I am speaking from the place of being a first-time mother, first-time pregnancy, no other children, and never having experienced this before. So I am speaking from a place of humility here because I know that there's so many women out there that can bring so much deep wisdom and understanding to this journey who have traversed it themselves. I feel like every new pregnant mama says this, but I have a new level of respect for mothers. I haven't even had my child yet because just the depths that this journey has brought me through thus far, and we're just at the precipice of the initiation into mother and parent. I bow to all of the mamas. And, it's like, we don't know. We didn't know. Like, for all of my friends and family who have gone through this themselves, and I think for so many of us who haven't experienced it, like, there's no way that we can fully understand the process and the depths, and also the need for support. And so we may not show up in a way that can really meet that for a person, and that's totally okay, right? It's like not anyone's fault, but I just wanted to speak to that because I'm getting so much beautiful support and messages and check-ins from all my mama friends because it's like they know they've been through it, and it's just really beautiful to be a part of that. And yeah, so at this point, I'm going into my 38th week and feeling pretty good. So for all of the more physical stuff, check in on the last episode. In this episode, I'm going to start off first with the mental body. Oh, but to finish my disclaimer, aside from, the humility and the transparency and acknowledgement that I'm speaking from this personal place as a first timer. Also note that I am not giving medical advice. This is really just to share what I have discovered, what's working for me, what's not, and hopefully provide just pointing to some resources and ways of communing with certain topics and ways of being in this process, in this journey, if you are planning, whether you're pregnant or not. And even if you're not planning, if this is star path, so to speak, I hope that and you can even share this out with friends or family if you find that it is helpful or intriguing, or it might be helpful for them. So please tune in to your intuition, to your heart, to your body, mind, spirit as a sovereign being, and take what resonates and really leave the rest. All right, with that, let's first go into the mental body, which I think is so important. In my experience, I'm very airy and in my head a lot, but also like in the ethers a lot in general with the nature of my work, but also just the nature of me and who I am and like my chart and my open centers and all this stuff. So the mental body is very active for me. And what I found was really important in my experience was really satisfying and nurturing, feeding my researcher mind, my investigative mind, my mind that needed to gather information. In the beginning, I had so many questions, as with everything. Like when I pursue or go into a particular topic or area, like I dive super deep into the weeds. I do a ton of research. That's just how I roll. And this was so helpful for me to understand things such as the physiology of pregnancy, of conception, pregnancy, and of birth and labor, and to research various items required for decision making. Now, with the birthing process, with pregnancy in general, and then the birthing process, there's a lot of decision making these days in this process. And I want to also note that I feel that maybe some women might feel like there isn't necessarily a lot of decision making, like the path is already set for you, or you're just following the prescribed to-do list that maybe your provider gave you. And I just want to kind of make a special note here that you get to have a say. You are the one who is leading the ship and decides on what your pregnancy and birth journey look like. Now, of course, we can't control outcomes, like that's not the point. But I think that there has been such a profound process of medicalization and pathologizing of pregnancy and the birth process in general that we as birthers and women, there's this almost forgetting that this is your journey and there are other options outside of what maybe you might be fed as the mainstream or as like the way. And, I think that it's healthy to really question and be curious and inquisitive about all of your options and to not take anything for granted and to always question. Like when we're working with providers, they're really service providers. So they're working for you. And so we need to take ownership of our ship and take ownership of our path and process. And that does require getting to know what our options actually are, looking at a different map than the one that we're just given. So I just wanted to say that because in my own part of the mental body process here for me was really looking at these things that initially I just took for granted as like, oh, this is the way it's going to be. And then unraveling that and seeing how so much of what we are prescribed and shown and taught, like in the movies, in media, by our doctors, through our family systems, they're all programs too. And so this is another opportunity to deprogram, to really cultivate your own map around this really special journey of gestating life, growing life, and very natural journey of doing so. Okay, so that getting off my soapbox on that. But it was important for me to make really informed decisions that aligned with what felt, number one, felt intuitively right for me and aligned with my values. But number two, that also made sense on like a practical and physiological level. So while I went into the research, I also made sure to always balance that with tuning into how does that feel for me and my body? Like, how does my body feel when I connect to that process? Or, you know, when the doctor tells me XYZ, like, does that feel true for me? And I think we have to constantly ask these questions and not get into the mode of just doing what we're told and handing over our sovereignty and our power to someone because we believe they have authority over us, or they have more authority because of, you know, maybe we perceive them to be more experienced or educated or knowledgeable. But you are the most knowledgeable of your own body, mind, and spirit. You are the expert of you. So I really encourage you to be that way when it comes to anything, not just pregnancy, right? This is the way that I think we need to be living our lives, especially today. So I just wanted to speak into that. All right. So let me get into some of the things that I found helpful in terms of the mental portion of things, the mental body. I think the first place to start is with a question that I had received, a very good question, but also a very deeply personal question that I think is important to speak into in terms of like creating the context for everything that I'm going to be talking about today. And that question was, what was my process around planning or, quote, trying versus leaving to chance, leaving my pregnancy and conception to chance? So I'm going to speak into that first to sort of set the context. I was never one to absolutely know that I wanted to become a mother and have kids. I was always very non-attached to this notion. I never felt pressure either from myself or from others to have kids. Now, of course, like when I was growing up and a teenager, like I just took it for granted that I would become a mom because you're just sort of like conditioned like that this is what you would do. And also people kind of speak about it in a way that it's like expected. But this was prior to me really having a deeper understanding of my actual desires and what it is that I wanted. So when I came to an age where I was of like childbearing years, or that it seemed like, okay, these could be the next steps, it didn't really occur to me to dive in or to explore that. I never had. I know some people grow up with like dreams of becoming a mother or like playing with dolls and really having an affinity for kids. I didn't have any of that. So I just wanted to state that because I think that provides context for the way that I've really come into this. And of course, there is no right or wrong. Everybody has their own journey. And some people are like never meant to be parents. And that's totally fine, right? So it wasn't until my late 30s, actually, that I really started to become more curious about it. Like, honestly, it felt like a very slow progression. It was never that I thought I wouldn't have kids. It just literally was that I wasn't really thinking about. And it was always like, oh, well, if it's meant to be, then it'll be. And so this slow progression really began in my 30s, and I still would not identify it as like a burning desire or anything, but rather more of a curiosity around the evolution from maiden to mother and the stewarding of another soul and a being coming through you. and the spiritual growth for all involved. So this was what was most intriguing to me in coming into my 30s. And I felt like in my late 30s, I was really ushered into working more intentionally with my sacral chakra, my reproductive system, and healing ancestral and intergenerational trauma held in these areas. For more context, I'm 38 years old. I began to have physical manifestations of symptoms in my mid to late 30s that basically forced me to look more deeply into these areas. Now, in my early years, when I first started with puberty and as a teenager, there was a lot around that area as well, a lot of pain with PMS, and in my teens and 20s, getting into birth control and having all this stuff. So it's not that I never had issues in this area, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but I had done so much work, healing work around my physical body and cleanup, so to speak, that a lot of these physical symptoms, manifestations went away. I didn't have them anymore. And here they were coming back. And they basically forced me to really look at what else is going on here, because it was beyond just physical. There was a lot that I was being called to work on the energetic and the spiritual level. And I knew that I had we could say a soul level fear and also a bodily held fear of birth. So this was not something that I was coming from my mind that was fully conscious. This was something that I intuitively knew was held in my body and held in my energetic field. And you could say maybe in my soul record. And that this was inherited, this was programmed, and this was in spiritual form from past life experiences. So I began to work on this at all levels, and a lot of the work was also physical that I had to do. But one of the things is that I had this profound experience with monkshood flower and in the making of flower essence with monkshood. When connecting to monkshood, and I had never met monkshood flower before this experience, I was on a beautiful trip with a group of people that we were exploring the regional land, and part of our journey that day was to commune with the flowers and to connect with medicine and to make flower essences. And so I began to explore, and I was led to monkshood, and monkshood began to communicate to me. And in that process, I connected to the immense grief, pain, suffering, and fear of loss that I held in my body and in my field from my ancestors and past lives by connecting with this flower and making medicine. So I did not have to take it long. I think it really was more of the experience of connecting with monkshood and making the medicine that was the most profound aspect, and having it near me, honestly. I did not have to take it long before it really ushered me into a deep healing journey connected to my wound, the wounding as mother, and more. So it led me to start to unfold a lot of these things. Years ago, as I mentioned, I've had experiences that definitely impacted my yoni, my womb, my ovaries, reproductive system in general, as well as my liver, which is so connected to everything, right? Our gut is connected to everything. But the liver connected so much to the energetics that passes through, but also the hormones. And so I had a lot of stuff going on with my liver and things that impacted it deleteriously that I had used, such as years of birth control use, both the pill and then eventually the IUD form. I also got the Gardasil vaccine when I was younger, which I definitely feel like impacted me negatively. Made my PMS worse, increased my digestive issues. And I think there's obviously a lot of stuff with the liver as well. My poor liver trying to detox these things. Ancestral lineage of pain. My mother and my maternal grandmother both talking about how they experienced severe PMS pain and how it was normal for us and it's genetic and it's to be expected. And not to mention a lot of shame in the family around sexuality and fear of getting pregnant young. In my experience, coming especially from my mom, because she was my mom, and so she was there reminding me. But both her mother, her parents in general, never spoke to her about sex because they were old school, super Catholic, where there's the delusion of abstinence only was a concept to abide by. So there was no attempt at educating or preparing children for these initiations, these very natural initiations into their sexuality. And my aunt also getting pregnant super young. So I feel like there's so much more beyond that, but there's a lot there. And I know that this is very common, especially in my experience, a lot of Latino families and immigrant families or families that also have very religious background. So it informed the way that my mom related to sexuality and reproduction and pregnancy. While she empowered her daughters with knowledge and education around sex and reproduction, my mom still carried a ton of judgment, fear, and shame that I can say now, was projected onto me as a young girl and a woman coming into her sexuality and, feeling pretty comfortable about it. I was pretty curious about it, which probably scares parents like that. So there's been so much around healing this wound of shame for my lineage, not just for myself and my body. Okay, so that's like the big background of kind of my orientation and my relationship with like sexuality and reproduction at that point. Now, in terms of coming into my process around getting pregnant and sort of like conscious conception, my partner and I never made an absolute decision to conceive. We did not plan. We did not try. I have that in quotes. However, we did stop preventing using prevention methods that we had used previously. And I definitely was a little looser with my tracking. So I track my periods and my temperature, my body temperature, using the fertility awareness method. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, I highly recommend the book Taking Charge of Your Fertility. Awesome starter book on the topic. There's many resources since then, but I'll just speak to that one because that was my first foray into this world and really like getting a deeper sense of my body and understanding the physiology behind reproduction and fertility. At the time we conceived, we both had been going through major transitions. And it was honestly a pretty contractive time for both of us individually and as a couple. So I think it's really interesting that that's when this little being, this little soul decided to come through. I kind of felt like it was like a message and this little being being like, get your shit together, guys, kind of moment. And also, I'm coming whether you plan it or not. And while I could say unexpected or unplanned, this baby was most definitely loved and welcomed and wanted. So I also want to acknowledge that I'm aware that this may be activating or triggering for some folks who may have a very different experience with the process of conceiving. There's so much around that. And I just want to say that I honor all feelings on this. I know that it could bring up a lot and all of your feelings and emotions are valid around this. The concept of conscious conception is something I began exploring some years ago, but even more so after reading a book by a previous guest, Penny Kelly, her book called Robes, A Book of Changes. And if you haven't heard Penny Kelly's episode, we'll link that one up. I highly recommend you check that out and you check out her book and sort of stay open to some of the messages in there because some of them can feel a little bit extreme and wild, but I honestly feel like there's so much wisdom in there. And in her book, she has a section discussing conscious conception. as well as what I could refer to as sacred sexuality, that I thought was extremely validating for me and thought-provoking. I know there are many resources out there for conscious conception, and there's many different ways of working with it or even how it is explained. I have not explored many, but I feel my own process was definitely directed by my spirit and soul, and by my body for that matter. Definitely way before my mind got on board. Definitely not by my mind. That goes for my preparation process. I was initiated into a process of preparation without my mind's actual acknowledgement that that's what was happening. Like I didn't fully realize and understand the events that were happening, all the things that were coming up. And I shared just a little slice of that my journey in really diving into these areas, I never consciously in my mind fully thought out, oh, this is all in preparation for birth and getting pregnant, although I feel like at the soul level, that definitely was there. So that's a little bit, I think, in response to that question. And as one example, sort of like this ushering into or curiosity, like this magnetism to certain resources and sources of wisdom connected to the like sacred sexuality, the birth process, and all of that began to unfold more from like my spirit-led journey prior to conception. One example was my increased interest in indigenous rites of birthing and healing. And this started to show up actually in a lot of client work. So that's one of the things, if you're a person who is working with others, if you're a healer, a helper, practitioner, so often my experience is that you start to get clients or people that show up in your life that reflect back to you what might be going on in your field, whether you're aware of it or not. Like a reflection of an internal process, and also even pointing to clues and directions of something that you need to look more into. And so I started to get more clients that, number one, like were started asking about pregnancy and spirit babies, and then also like ancestral healing, womb healing, a lot of around womb and sacred sexuality healing for like questions within their Akashic record sessions. So I started to receive messages, right, for these people, for my clients. But it was also messages for me, because that always seems to happen. There's like these, what feels like waves, where when I'm supposed to be led into a process, it'll show up in my work in some way. So I started to get a lot of clients that were focused in really looking more deeply in these areas, which made me more curious, and reflective that, oh, I'm also curious about this stuff too. One of the resources that came through I remember a couple of clients of mine that I had been working with, and I came across in various ways, serendipitously, was a book called Red Medicine, Traditional Indigenous Rites of Birthing and Healing by Patricia Gonzalez. Patricia is an academic, but also a healer, a traditional healer. And she has written this book as well as other books. She also lectures, and she addresses what's called red medicine as a system of healing that includes birthing practices, dreaming, and purification rites to really reestablish personal and social equilibrium. So this book in particular explores indigenous medicine across North America, and she places special emphasis on how indigenous knowledge really has endured and persisted among the peoples with a legacy to Mexico. So as an herbalist and a traditional birth attendant and a baby catcher, you could say, weaves her experience, her lived experience as a healer with really in-depth researcher as an academic and researcher, with the oral traditions, the storytelling, and the symbols to really paint the picture of like this indigenous knowledge that we have access to. And in the first episode, that last week's episode, I spoke into my curiosity around my own Puerto Rican lineage and how really challenging it has been to just find a good amount of information on traditional indigenous birthing processes and rites. And yeah, so her book really was such a refreshing and beautiful entry into these indigenous knowledge ways and wisdom keepers, and that how this knowledge is really now being reclaimed by Chicanos and Mexican Americans, Mexican indigenous peoples, and the importance of this resurgence in information. I really took away from this particular book, and I felt like it was really speaking to me at a time when I was coming into a deeper understanding around this process of healing my womb space and like ancestral lineage and trauma around it, was the principle of regeneration as it is manifested in the archetype Spider Woman. And I had been working with this archetype Spider Woman, the Great Weaver, for some years, and actually since my mom's passing, since her crossing over, on and off. And so it was like this resurgence of it, but in a totally different context. And just sort of connecting to a different way of being with this process of pregnancy and birth through an indigenous lens, through the red medicine lens, and purification rites, and how pregnancy, carrying a child, and birthing are all considered ceremonies. And so that felt so profound to me, and that I feel like I intuitively sensed already that this was a deep ceremony for me and an initiation, but really kind of connecting with that prior to me even conceiving yet, I think laid some of the groundwork mentally as well as spiritually, like in my energetic field, for this journey to ensue, for like the process to unfold. So that was one of the beautiful resources that I had connected with prior to conception. Now, after I found out I was pregnant and I started, my mind got into researcher mode and all of that, I started to look more into what all of my options were and learning a lot more about the physiology of birth. One of the most helpful resources I found is a website called evidence-based-birth.com. And it's not just a website with a ton of resources, but they also put these really helpful one-pagers together, kind of summaries, and they also have a podcast. They talk about current systems and topics that are really relevant as it relates to pregnancy and the birthing process today. So that's a really wonderful resource that I highly recommend, evidence-based-birth.com. That was kind of satiating my need for answering a lot of these questions that I had, such as what's actually happening physiologically in the body, and when in terms of decision making around what type of labor and birth experience do I want to have, and do I want to work with an OBGYN or work with like a midwifery birthing center or midwifery group, or work with an independent midwife? Like, what's the spectrum of all of those choices? Having an understanding around that, making the right choice for myself. Where would I like to give birth, and how would I like the support to look like and feel like during my pregnancy process? So for me, ultimately, it felt right to work with an independent midwife and to do a home birth. This, I think, is also colored initially by the context of the world that we're living in COVID times. And I already don't really enjoy being in a hospital setting. But now with just everything that's been going on over the past couple of years, it's like, ooh, there's so many women that I know are now really opting to explore home birth as an option versus what maybe their initial inclination to have a birth in the hospital. I actually don't think I ever planned or wanted to have birth in a hospital, although of course you can't control what happens. And again, you can't control outcomes. So I'll just say that my intentions are to have a home birth with my midwife. So found my midwife and started to build my own support team and who I felt would be really helpful for me and the type of environment that I wanted and the type of support I wanted for my own pregnancy and birthing experience. In terms of mental preparation, one of the things that was also a kind of a clue, because this started happening prior to me conceiving, was I started to follow more and more Instagram accounts having to do with birth. You know, I remember a friend being like, uh-oh, like that's kind of a sign that you're curious about it. Maybe your body, your heart are starting to go in that direction. And so I'll make sure to make a list of Instagram accounts that I started to follow and I found really helpful. For example, Empowered Birth Project, Lathan Thomas, who is a doula and educator at Glow Maven and at Mama Glow. Hayes Hawk, who is a midwife, birthkeeper at I Am Hayes Hawk Rosen. Mama Mística, this one is in Spanish, I believe. She's based out of Spain, so that's at Mama Mística. And there's just like so many others that I began to discover through this, and really through curiosity of like the sacred healing of the womb space, but also this initiation into motherhood. And so looking at inspiring videos, seeing examples of pregnancy, happy, beautiful, powerful, empowering births, and building that in my field of consciousness. So especially in my subconscious, I think this was happening around the same time that I was doing some deep healing work ancestrally in my womb space and working with monkshood, as I had mentioned. And so it's almost like I was replacing this old template and blueprint that was not aligned for me, that was about grief and loss and pain, and replacing it with a template of empowerment and beauty and love and hope and regeneration and power. And so I was feeding my energy body and my subconscious with these images and this information and videos, and really starting to build a bank, so to speak, of this, so that because anytime you do, for example, energy work, when you are clearing and releasing, you need to be bringing in light or something to fill in that void in that space and to replace with like regenerative medicine. So that's what I was doing more like on a subconscious level. And when I did get pregnant, some of the really helpful resources that I discovered to continue this process of sort of building this field, this empowering field of consciousness, some people can say like expanding experiences, having evidence for what is possible. So in continuation of that, I started to prepare my mental body with courses. So I signed up for a few courses because I'm also a program and course junkie. I offer them and I also love them because I think that gosh, there's so much that you can receive in a program and a course versus trying to piecemeal shit together from YouTube, which is also great, and free. But I just really like being able to go to a container, which is why I also create programs and courses, because I feel like it's like, here's all of the stuff that I have learned over the, 15 years and like package it for you. That's what I want from someone. So a few of the courses that I signed up for, one was called Happy Home Birth. And I'll make sure to link all of these up in the show notes. So if you are interested, intrigued, you want to check these out. I don't have any affiliation with these. These are just programs and folks like educators that I came across in various ways, and I really enjoyed their work. So the first was Happy Home Birth, and that was to help me understand and navigate this concept of birthing at home, which unfortunately was foreign to me, in the sense that like I didn't have that many friends or family that were doing it in the modern day. Although in my grandparents' time, like everybody did it in Puerto Rico. So it kind of skipped a generation. And it's so interesting how quickly we can lose knowledge and education and wisdom in just a span of a generation or two. So it's just profound. So it's sort of like this process of reclaiming. And it was interesting because I feel like, in speaking even with my partner's mom, who is very familiar with home birth because her mother had a ton of kids and most of them at home. So it was much more of a natural process. She was probably the one with like the least surprised or worried reaction from our family. And I think that there's so many stigmas against something like home birth because there's so much fear in the medicalization around it, including from some of my own family members, which I'm going to talk about setting boundaries and how to speak with people, or how to protect yourself really from sort of like the worries and the negative energy and all of that from others. Another program that I came across was a pain-free birth. And this is from Karen Welton at Pain Free Birth. I came across her because of a book that literally found me. I wasn't looking for this. I didn't even think that a pain-free birth was possible, and not that I have experienced birth yet. Like, I'm not saying that this is what's going to unfold for me. And I think there's a lot to also unravel with like this title of pain-free, but really starting to look at, again, as I had mentioned in the beginning, a lot of these assumptions and these programs that we have running about the birth process. And it's not that like if you experience pain that it's some kind of failure or anything, but that there is the possibility of having an experience where it's not painful. And it can be intense, and it could definitely be transformative and like the hardest fucking work you'll do. But there doesn't have to be this like fear-based crazy pain that is so pervasive in media and like just in general in our society, and from horror stories, from people like to tell you horror stories all the time about their birth process. So I was really curious about this because I came across this book that literally landed in my field of awareness. I was not looking for it. I don't even remember how this book got to me, to be honest. And that book was called Supernatural Childbirth by Jackie Mize. Now, I think if you're a listener, you understand that I am not connected to any particular religion or denomination. I consider myself very spiritually connected, and believing in God, source, creator, very plugged in and attuned to, my guides and angels. And like, so all of that I'm very much connected to. Supernatural Childbirth is definitely a Christian oriented book. So I think years ago, I probably wouldn't even have considered picking it up because I had a lot more judgment around like Christianity in general because of some wounding earlier in my years experience with Catholicism and like the hypocrisy that I experienced within the Catholic Church and just like a lot of problematic stuff that I had to really work through. But now I feel like I've come to a place where I really see all the interconnections. And so like the scriptures and the wording, like I'm really curious about connecting to those in a way that for me resonates at like a more in an expanded way beyond a literal translation of the Bible or the word of God, so to speak. But I just wanted to touch in on that because this book, while it's very Christian and Christian oriented, it brought some gems to me that really opened up this field of possibility and reframing around this process of childbirth. And I thought it was also interesting that the book was written quite a while ago. I believe Jackie Mize has since passed. But at the same time, I had read Joe Dispenza's Becoming Supernatural. I have mentioned his work in prior podcast episodes before and a lot in my programs. He's written quite a few really profound, beautiful books on the healing process, and his latest book is Becoming Supernatural. So I had read that book, and this term supernatural really intrigued me. And so when supernatural childbirth came through, I didn't know like what it was going to be about. I started reading it. I was like, oh, wow, this is like really Christian based. But there was so much there that was in line with so much of what I've already come to understand to be true about our energy bodies, about our soul, and with Dr. Joe Dispenza's work in looking at meditation and stepping into the role of creator of your life experience and your reality through the body, mind, and soul connection. So I read Supernatural Childbirth. I thought I took what resonated, left what didn't, but that's what led me to Karen's program after doing a little bit more research for her program, Pain Free Birth, and she has an Instagram that's really popular at Pain Free Birth. So I would check that out because it's not just about attainment of this outcome of a pain-free birth. It really is more about connection and understanding to the possibilities and the supernatural ability we have like through this birthing process and what is possible for us. And from the physiology of it, so a lot of education, to the energetic and the spiritual. So that was really helpful for me. And then another course that I'm currently in that isn't necessarily about the pregnancy or birth process, but it is about the initiation into motherhood, parenthood, and baby and supporting baby. And it's from this organization called Innate Traditions that was started by Rochelle Garcia Saliga. And this program is called Physiologic Baby Care. So I'm currently in this program right now. I'm going to give birth in the middle of this program, but it's helping me understand on a deep level this connection, the mama-baby dyad, and so much of it begins in the pregnancy and in utero. So that's been really beautiful to be a part of as well. And I highly, highly recommend you check out Rochelle's work with Innate Traditions, and she's got a great Instagram account too. She has a postpartum training. She's got other trainings, so definitely recommend her work. In terms of other mental preparatory books or resources, I started to look into hypnobirthing resources, and there's so many. Started to read some books on hypnobirthing and really looking at this process of how to support myself through the labor and the birthing process. So that is more focused on that particular part of my journey and not as much with the pregnancy. Although to really implement it, you need to be connecting with this work and practicing it while you're pregnant, like during the entire duration of your pregnancy. So I've been working with breath work and having an understanding of the fear, tension, pain cycle, really learning a lot about the physiology of our brain chemistry and our body chemistry and how that impacts our experience, both in pregnancy and at birth. So there's so much that these books and these resources have offered around that really built my understanding of like not only what to expect, but how to support my physiology and how to support my emotional body and my energy body in order to cultivate an experience in pregnancy and birth that is more easeful, not easy, but like with more ease and love and less fear. And that's one of the things that I had struggled with in the very beginning, as I had mentioned, was this fear that was like primal, that was in my body and also in my soul field that I really had to work through. And so a lot of these resources were helpful in really shifting that on all these different levels. One of the first books or two books that I went to when I found out that I was pregnant was Ina May's Guide to Childbirth and Spiritual Midwifery by Ina May Gaskin, who was a midwife. She is still alive today. She wrote these really seminal books that brought this resurgence and interest and a reverence for midwifery and the culture of midwifery back to North America. Now, speaking from the place of an American in the United States, I know that around the world, home birth and midwives are so much more common. So in the US, it's like definitely, especially at the time that Ina May Gaskin began to work, like that was not the case at all. And even today, the majority of births are happening in hospitals with doctors. But I think that, as I had mentioned, is shifting a little bit, especially because of these times and like people may not want to be in hospitals. Those two books, especially Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, was so helpful. I got both of these in audiobook form. And that's the thing, like I read a ton of books. Half of them are probably actual hard copy books and half of them are audiobooks because I love to listen to them in the car while walking, cleaning, cooking, like that kind of stuff. So just like podcasts, and that's why I have a podcast. I just love the audio format. And so I highly recommend getting those in audiobook form because you could just listen on the go and listen over and over again. And it just kind of turns more into like a meditation. So loved those books. I also started to read Birthing from Within. And this was a book that actually was first brought to my attention before I was pregnant by a client of mine who went through her own birthing process, and it was not the birth journey that she had desired. And I think that there was a lot that she learned from, and she started to connect with this work from this book, Birthing from Within. And they also have a website and resources and teachings for people who perhaps want to work as doulas or just like support in the birthing process. And what I loved about this book was that it really brought your mental awareness to all of the assumptions and things that we carry and pre-programmed, and to start to unravel a lot of that. And also gives really practical and fun advice and activities to try out. There's a lot of artwork practices to connect with that really shift you into more of that like metaphorical mind portion of our brain and really connecting to the pregnancy and the birthing process from that place. Because, ultimately, birth is not mental, right? So while I'm talking about a lot of things that I connected to prep me mentally, this was like in the beginning. And I felt like the deeper I went into my pregnancy journey, the less of that information I really needed, that kind of like researcher, info-focused type of resources, and starting to get much more into the emotional and spiritual aspects of this journey, because that is really the place where birthing happens, and you opening up as this vessel, as this channel for this soul to come through, and you getting into this like primal mind-body connection where it's instinctual and intuitive. So by the second trimester, started to naturally move away from more of like the heady research-based resources and information, and really started to dive more deeply into the emotional and the spiritual-based resources. So this was a lot of these that I'm talking about are kind of in that transition period of like moving more into that. One of the blessings that I experienced was people reaching out with gifts and offerings, and one of which was a client of mine. Her name is Amanda, and so shout out to you, Amanda. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this on the podcast, but also for your beautiful offering. Amanda had reached out to me and offered a birth art session. Now, birth art is a form of labor preparation that she described as using art to tap into your unconscious and prepare to face the unknown. And she began working on a doula and childbirth educator training with Birthing from Within. So I mentioned the Birthing from Within book, and they have a website and training. So through that orientation, they see pregnancy as a personal and psychic journey, not just a physical event. And birth art session is a way to really tap into that. And so, of course, I had to say yes. I proceeded to have a session with her, and it was just so beautiful and really both grounding and expanding for me to touch in on this experience and this journey at like this more artistic, metaphorical, symbolic, spiritual level, and creating art. So she walked me through meditative storytelling and some exercises and some artwork, and it was lovely. It was just so lovely. And now I have some art pieces that I can have with me to accompany me through my birth process. And it just felt so sacred and like such good medicine that I really wanted to mention it and highlight her work. And I know that there are also others that are doing it as well. But if you are interested and you're in the process of a journey of pregnancy, and this sounds intriguing for you, I encourage you to check out Birthing from Within. And also you can drop me a line if you want to connect with Amanda, because she experienced the support herself and really wants to pay it forward with these birth art experiences and sessions. So if you are interested, you can reach out to us. I may not get back to you right away, since I'm in maternity leave, but we'll make sure to direct you to Amanda if you want to get connected with her. But that was another beautiful experience that I had that just sort of really integrated a lot of what I had been journeying and processing in a very tangible way through art. I also came across a resource called Free Birth Society, and I love their work. Many might consider them as radical, and I feel like they are radical. They're really bringing forth this rooted sense of birthing, of like the innate capacity for women to birth on their own terms. And they have a ton of resources and programs. I believe they have trainings and retreats. They have a podcast, an Instagram, and they have these beautiful affirmation cards that I got that were so helpful. There's a couple of audios that I got from them. One was an affirmations audio, and another was a meditative audio. So I'm really big on audio and sort of like this programming process through audio and listening every day and every night, like to affirmations, making my own affirmations, connecting to meditations from like the hypnobirthing meditations. Free Birth Society has a free meditation that they also offer that's downloadable from their website. There's also wonderful apps where you can find free meditations to support you in the pregnancy journey and with the birth process and preparation. So I'm all about that stuff, and I listen to all of that. I also pray. So these are all components of like how I like to commune and connect with and engage with this really deep process of reprogramming, reconditioning, and preparation and connection to myself as a birther and as a womb carrier and carrier of a being currently. So I recommend checking them out. Their affirmation cards are awesome. One last one I'd like to mention is the Rooted Pregnancy Journal by Dorothée Sophie Royal, who I had on the podcast not too long ago. And I really love her pregnancy journal because it's kind of like this beautiful place to take all that I'm working with and uncovering and engaging with, and then starting to like put it down in this journal and engage with like some of the questions and the practices that she's created that is really guided on a week-by-week basis. So that's been really lovely to journey with as well. I also keep my own independent journal because I have to keep notes, otherwise I forget so much. So I have my own journal that is more in like a bullet journaling style format where I have notes kept on all of my appointments, things, events that have happened, journal entries of my personal experience, my emotional experience, things that have been uncovered, things that I've engaged with, like literally everything I'm tracking and I'm putting in this journal. And I'm also keeping in mind that like this will be read most likely by my future child and my partner. And I love to build sort of that story and context for them so that they can go back and listen to. And I think that's really special. So that's something that I'm doing that I feel really connected to and has been really helpful in part of the integration process of all of these things that, it could just feel so overwhelming and there's so much. And so having an integration process like that where you can just kind of journal and put it all in one place is really, really helpful. One thing I wanted to speak into, especially around the mental and the emotional body portion, is boundaries. And I think this is really, really critical when we are in any kind of stage of healing or growth and some like a deeply personal and spiritual process of evolution, which I consider pregnancy to be a part of, and ceremony. There needs to be boundaries. So that's one of the things that I was very clear on. I needed to protect my mental, my emotional body, and my energetic space. So some of the things that I began to do was avoid indulging in horror stories or other people's negativity. So as soon as someone starts to, well, first of all, I would just avoid it if I can. But if they start to share, I might say like, thank you. I really want to hear your story, but I'm really holding off on listening to other people's stories until after my own birth process. Or if I wasn't able to help it and I came across a horror story or someone's negativity or judgment about me and my process, I have this energetic way of saying, that's not mine. I am not claiming that. I am not keeping that. That is flowing straight through, and it's Mama Earth is taking it for me. I'm putting up energetic walls of light and also clearing my energy body frequently, which due to the nature of the work that I do, so I do intuitive readings on most days with the Akashic Records, there's a built-in mechanism of protection. And then before and after every client, I'm clearing my energy body. So it was already a process that I do daily, and I just made sure to be intentional with that when it came to anything related to pregnancy. One of the things that I noticed was that it was almost like my energy body as well as this baby, and I feel like maybe this baby's energy and guides put up some energetic boundaries on their own, because I noticed that in the beginning when I was doing intuitive readings, you would imagine that it would be a lot more easy for me because people say, oh yeah, well, I heard when you get pregnant, like you get much more intuitive and you're open. And all of that is true. Like you definitely open up in a lot of ways. But I think because I was already doing that work, baby and my body were like, okay, we cannot be too open. Like we need to be protecting and putting up these boundaries. And so in the beginning, I found that my intuitive readings, the way that I was receiving information was a little bit different and took a little bit more like patience and kind of navigation through what felt like more layers of protection, which was fine. And then I learned to really work with that. But I just thought that that was interesting for me as a worker who does intuitive work. I also was being extra mindful about my thoughts because I understand very deeply the power of my thoughts. So really being extra mindful about my ways of thinking around my pregnancy process, my body, my journey, like the fears and all of that. I mentioned the brain rewiring process and transmuting fear. So a lot of that was through learning, expanding my awareness of what is possible and like what actually happens in our bodies, listening to empowering stories, being connected with really supportive people, praying and meditating, like all of that was part of my process of transmuting fear. I had done a lot of energy release work with ancestral work. The primary mode, there's a lot of different ways to do ancestral work, and some of it you may not even recognize as ancestral work, right? It's like, for example, when you actually make a huge shift in your life, that can be ancestral work. But one of the ways that I did ancestral work in a more intentional and ceremonial way was with Daniel Foer's resource, Ancestral Medicine, in his book. Super helpful. I really appreciate the practicality of the way that he outlines things, and it's been really profound working through that book. I was doing that prior to pregnancy. So that was a huge piece, I think, of just this pregnancy in general, was doing ancestral work and connecting with my ancestors. Also, general energy work with the Akashic Records and connecting to my guides. I do that on a daily basis. So that was a big part of my protection and boundary setting as well. And one of my favorite ways of releasing emotions and kind of like supporting the emotional body and the energy body in a very practical way is the emotion code. So there's a wonderful book by the same title, The Emotion Code. It is a process, a very specific process and protocol of how to release emotions or energy in motion, right? So stuck energies that I had, I really utilized the emotion code process to get me through some of like these little humps that I would come across whenever I would feel stuck. I'd be like, connect with my records and then bring in this process of the emotion code. And very often there would be something there to release. In addition to working with all of the practitioners that I had mentioned in my first episode. So like the craniosacral therapist and body work, like that was really important. And my acupuncturist. So those have been all really, really helpful for my energy body and allowing me to set up better boundaries. And so that my energetic aura and field wasn't as leaky, you could say. The other thing was very practical things, setting practical things in place in order to set up boundaries. So, for example, setting up maternity leave early and planning, since really learning about my pregnancy process and basically all my year plans going out the window, which was in the very, very beginning of my pregnancy journey, like mentally very, very challenging to surrender to the process that like I had to let go of so many things. You know, I had my quarterly plans, my 3-month plan, my 6-month plan, my year plan, and I had to let go of all of that. So once I, went through sort of like the grief and the control issues around that process in the very beginning, then it was about, okay, like making a plan to set up the physical space and financial space to be able to have a comfortable maternity leave. And I knew that I wanted to do the cuarentena, which is basically the 40-day postpartum period, as ceremony, as support to myself. So if you haven't heard of the cuarentena, and we had a whole podcast episode on it, and it was called La Cuarentena, Healing in Postpartum with Felicia Cocotzin Ruiz. She is a phenomenal curandera, indigenous foods activist, natural foods chef, and she came on the podcast to talk specifically on the topic of postpartum wellness and La Cuarentena, which is this period of postpartum recovery that's like roughly 40 days of healing after childbirth. And there's so many instances of this. This is also considered like the 4th trimester in various cultures throughout the world. And so really knowing that I wanted to implement that, I also wanted to have some time or a break before my birth so that I wasn't working until the very last minute. I really wanted to cultivate space before and after, sort of as a cushion. So that means that intentionally needing to create the literal space for that and the ability to do that. So I had to set up my plans for, okay, how am I going to financially be able to support myself to do so? What needs to happen in order for me to create that space? So that was part of my boundaries and my intention setting, and really the practical work leading up to that as well. Some of you asked about my connection to the spirit of this baby and spirit babies in general. So I just want to speak into that. At the beginning of my pregnancy, I definitely felt the fiery energy of this being. I think I mentioned it before in like my announcement and my episode with Dorothy that I just mentioned. And before I even knew that they were going to be a Sagittarius, assuming that they're on time. So there's a lot of that fiery energy. I felt the influence of it upon my own constitution and ways of relating with others, how it was showing up in my own life, like my pitta was aggravated. There's a lot there in connection to that energy. So there was a lot of surrendering happening at the beginning of my pregnancy, both because of the unexpected nature of it. And therefore, as I had mentioned, like literally all my plans going out the window. I was in the middle of a launch of a program and literally was forced to rest, slow down, and do way less, and really having to let go of a lot of goals and expectations because I was really bogged down with the nausea and like the blahness that came over me, the fatigue in like those first several weeks of the first trimester that really started to kick in. A lot of that, I think, having to do with the stress, the contractive nature of the energies at that time that I was swimming in. And I think that had a lot to do with a lot of the symptoms I was experiencing at that time, even though for a lot of people, like those are deemed as normal because of hormonal fluctuations, which are very real, right? At the time, like a shit ton of hormones influxing. And so just having to work with all of that and coming to a space of total surrender and letting go of my usual go, go, go. Like I usually show up 120%. I could only show up like 60% maybe, which was very challenging for me. But I've had a lot of practice in surrender in my life, and I'm a pretty easygoing person, so it wasn't super painful to do so. I just really had to trust that what I was doing was enough, that we would be taken care of financially, that this was part of a larger evolutionary process in my own work and how I show up in the world, and really opening up to what this baby had to teach us, this fiery spirit, and connecting in that way. In terms of communicating with baby and baby spirit questions, spirit baby questions I received, I just want to say that if you feel that you have not had or do not have strong connection to your spirit babies, everyone's experience is different. Like, there is no right time to feel a connection if you're pregnant. Like, if you feel disconnected, there's no better or right way of being. And just because you don't feel a connection to the spirit of the baby doesn't mean that it's not there. I see this a lot with people and their guides, for example, in readings. I feel their guides come in super strong, they're super present, but the individual may feel a level of disconnection and, not being able to fully connect with their guides. This is very common. And this is also the case with connecting with spirit babies. So in the beginning, I felt this being very palpably from an energetic perspective. I felt how their energy influenced and began to weave with my own energy body, and how it impacted my way of showing up in the world and relating to myself and others. I also had a few times in meditation where I intentionally connected with this being and felt their enthusiasm, their excitement, their curiosity, love, and their overall energy. When it comes to the sex of the baby, there's no conclusive or concrete pattern when it comes to the spirit world. Like, we can feel a lot of feminine energy and be totally positive it's a girl, and then they come earthside and it's male. Sex does not equate to gender, and neither equates to the energetics that one might feel in baby spirit world. Now, having said that, there are some spirit baby communicators that are pretty good with identifying the sex if the baby tells them, like actually communicates to them about it. I've also heard stories of people having dreams of one sex, like a little girl coming through that feels so real, and yet the baby ends up being a boy. And there's a good example of this in a book that can be a great resource if you're interested in spirit baby communication. So there's two resources. The one that I'm just about to mention is called What All Spirit Babies Want Their Mamas to Know, Otherworldly Wisdom to Support the Journey to Motherhood and the Journey to Awakening. And that one is by Kate Street. She's got some really great anecdotal stories of her own experience. One that I just shared where she was positive she was meant to have this little girl and she ended up having a little boy. The other resource that I highly recommend is Spirit Babies. These are both books. Spirit Babies, How to Communicate with the Child You're Meant to Have by Walter Mackinson. And he has since passed, but this was one of the best books I found on spirit babies and communication with the spirit babies. And I found it very illuminating and also affirming and confirming with a lot of the readings that I had been doing with people. I had connected with a couple of spirit babies a few years ago of my own. So this is years ago, right? Like a few years ago, prior, obviously, to my pregnancy. They showed up in my dreams and in my energetic space. They would literally hang out some days where I was like, okay, geez, I feel you. But it didn't feel aligned for me at the time. Like, I didn't feel ready, or at least I felt I was spiritually not ready at that time to conceive. And that's around the time when my sacral issues really started to ramp up, the ones that I'm talking about. Like, they were trying to get my attention. And I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, I was on a plane and I had this vision. Like, sometimes on planes, I like to meditate, get bored and just go into a space and thinking about you're kind of close to space, you're in the ethers, you're in the air. So went into meditation. I had a vision of one of my ovaries covered in what looked like dark black tissue. I felt it was both energetic and a premonition. I didn't want to believe it at first because I was like, physically, I was so healthy. And I was like, how can this happen? I've been feeling so good. And then little by little, the symptoms started to creep in. There was a lot connected to my ancestors that I was meant to work with and through, connected to my ovaries and my womb. So back to the spirit baby, I remember a boy being very inquisitive and excited to come earthside. He was asking me a ton of questions. He had so much energy. And after some time of me resisting that and sort of resisting engaging with this spirit baby, he went away. And I had a period of time with no spirit baby communication. I never felt that energy of that baby again. He never came back. And although, of course, it showed up in my work with clients more often, as I had mentioned, that always happens. So I got to learn a little bit more about spirit baby communication, or presence, at least through my work. I wouldn't call myself a medium. I do not, like in the traditional sense of a medium and connecting with loved ones that are crossed over or spirits. But when I'm connected to one's Akashic records, I'm connected to various levels of consciousness. So it's like I plug into a field of consciousness, and spirit babies can present themselves and communicate through this field of consciousness. So I got curious about spirit babies and started to do more research. That's when I found the books that I had mentioned. And I connected with self-proclaimed spirit baby communicators and continued to have occasional clients with spirit babies showing up or, where they would ask about connecting to babies. I had a session with Sarah Naya Soleil, and I had initially sat in a workshop with her, and it was very enlightening. And she brought some clarity to what I was experiencing in my own life. So I highly recommend her work. She is a spirit baby communicator, but also doula. She's got trainings, and her website is spiritbabycommunication.com. And I believe also sarahnayasoleil.com. So I'm not sure which one is active right now, but I'll put her contact info and the website in the resource section in the show notes, so you can connect with her work there. There's a couple of other resources. I have not worked with these people, but I have heard from others that they do really great work and they connect with spirit babies and also angels that are connected with that realm. One is Emily the Medium, and that's emilythemedium.com. And the other is Taylor Page, and she's more specifically an angel communicator, but I know that she's been really helpful for some people, and her website is angelsandamethyst.com. So in terms of the spirit baby communication and realms, those are some resources that I found really helpful and some practitioners. Okay, so to answer some questions about spirit babies that I received from people and sort of like connecting to babies and rituals and all of that. While I felt the baby's spirit for myself, now this is my own personal experience, while I felt the baby's spirit energy strongly in the beginning, because it was such a new energy in my own field, like it was so different and really amplified certain aspects of my constitution and the fiery side in me, that it was pretty stark. The first trimester challenges, like the fatigue, nausea, the contractive period in my personal life, and trying to keep all my shit together while launching a program and making money, was very challenging. And it left me feeling a bit disconnected from baby because I was so focused on just trying to like get through the first trimester and really getting through navigating a lot of the contractive experiences that were happening at that time. So I felt that there was kind of a level of disconnection from baby. And that didn't come back in. Like I didn't start to really feel the connection until like later in the second trimester, to be honest. Even though I would talk to baby and connect with baby, like I didn't really feel that full connection. And I think that had a lot to do with my own process and processing around it. And also baby's distance, like, so I'll talk about spirit babies and bodies in just a moment. Ways to communicate with spirit baby. I do so through meditation and through prayer, through just simply talking, like talking out loud to baby, sending energy and love in my body, and also the Akashic records. So I open up the records and I communicate in that way. Although I consciously did not want to read the records of this baby, even though this baby is like also a part of me. But what I did was open up the Akashic records just to open up the field of consciousness and to communicate with my spirit baby. We also, my partner and I, talk to baby, we play music. My partner does a lot of hands-on touching, like belly for connection. So those are all ways that we connect with baby, both in like physical realm and the unseen realms. I had a question someone sent about when does the spirit of the baby enter the body? And, I just want to say I can only speak from my own experience being pregnant myself and connecting with some spirit babies with clients. So like the client work that I have done, I experience the spirit of my baby outside of the body. I experienced that definitely up until like around 6 months, like the latter part of the second trimester, when then I started to feel baby start to come in and out of the body. Like, it's hard to describe, but when I was communicating in the beginning, it was like baby was definitely still in, spirit realm. And I didn't feel as much of the embodiment. And then as the pregnancy progressed, I felt baby like traveling in and out, essentially. And I definitely felt that there were moments when I felt baby's energy so present inside of me, embodied. And then other times when baby's spirit and energy were more in the ethers and floating and not present in me, but I could still connect to it. And I had an Akashic meditative session when I connected with my baby. And I felt this was in the sort of the second half of pregnancy. And I felt baby's presence within my own field. So very, very close. Through this experience, and when I have connected to the spirit babies of others, it was usually when the person was not pregnant. And then I connected to the presence of the baby in the spirit realm. So I can't speak to working with others when they're pregnant and like connecting to their spirit baby because I hadn't done that. But I believe spirit babies can traverse embodiment and the spirit realm all the way up until birth. I know that other people who connect to spirit babies, they also say this as well, that, you can even have a spirit baby who doesn't fully come into embodiment until like that moment when they're being born. And then even like, for example, if they're premature, they might still have as like sort of this protective, like energetic, spiritual container where they're not necessarily fully embodied. There's a lot of opinions on this, obviously, depending on your orientation and even like religion or spiritual beliefs. Like, you can have your own beliefs around this. And all I have to say is take what resonates, leave the rest. Like, you don't have to believe in any of this. Maybe this is the first time you're even hearing about spirit babies, but I'm just sharing from my own experience. I was curious about what my guides had to say about this topic and sort of like plugging into the field of consciousness through the Akashic records. So I took this question to the records. And here's a little bit of what I received as a response or an answer to this question around like, when does baby spirit enter the body? Spirit babies are always on the move. They are meant to be not fully embodied until they come earthside, which is part of their carnal transition, and they fully commit to an embodied life, no matter how short or long. While they still maintain spiritual connection very strongly as infants and babies after birth, they no longer have the ability to fully connect to the same level of consciousness or oneness as prior to embodiment. This is an agreement of the incarnation. This can be daunting for some and may cause delays, hiccups, and issues coming forth in the birthing process. Having conscious, loving, supportive, and aware mothers and stewards of birth is helpful for the baby's transition. During birth, there is the opening of the portal to the cosmic sky, realms of the spirit, where the energies travel through a cord into the energy body of the mother, and then through the portal of her birth canal. There can also be guides, angels, other beings such as past loved ones or ancestors that are present are there to support this process for baby's transition. So that was a little bit of the answer that I got when I connected to the Akashic Records on this. And I encourage you, whether you're pregnant or not, if you want to connect with a spirit baby, to just simply start engaging in meditation and prayer and seeing if you feel called to do so, just to really open up that intention in that field, because that's what it starts with. It starts with the intention that you have in your heart and the openness to receive the messages and to connect. Okay, the last topic that I want to just touch on, because it came in from a few different people, but this was around shadow work and talking about shadow work during pregnancy. So in my personal experience, and for those of you who are like, what's shadow work? This is not a familiar topic. Shadow work is essentially working through a lot of the things that we may be holding on various levels of consciousness and fields. So subconsciously in our bodies, in our energetic field, in our soul records, in our ancestral lineage, shadow work is doing the work to sort of dig up and really look at these maybe what might feel like darker or heavier aspects of our experience and existence or programmings, and to bring healing to that, to really work with them. And that doesn't have to be a scary process. Shadow work doesn't mean like going into negativity or like curses or anything like that, but it's more around accepting all aspects and facets of ourself, which includes the shadow. So not just the light side, but also our shadow, which is also beautiful and can really teach us a lot about ourselves. So in my personal experience, my guides and higher self have guided me to start shadow work prior to conception. Like I truly felt like I was being led and ushered into a period of rapid shadow work, which I already talked a little bit about. But after conception, I felt like I was being guided or directed to very specific aspects and areas to clear and work through. Karmically, I felt my partner and I had to accelerate the work within our own relationship. And in my individual experience, clearing up old emotions and what you could call static in my energy body. It almost felt like I just had this impulse, and I was guided to very specific practitioners and healers, and to do just like dive in headfirst into this work. I held a lot of ancestral and familial trauma in my hips and my low back. For a long time, this was a major place where I did and continue to do work. I'm not saying that I'm done with any of this. There is absolutely an acceleration of shadow work that can happen if you're on this path during pregnancy, because spirit baby and your spirit are aligning for the best frequency match. So what I have received in terms of knowledge around this was that baby wants to come in and make sure that certain things are aligned or attuned to be a good match, so to speak, energetically for them to come through like their embodiment, their incarnation. And pregnancy is a time when like all of that can happen really fast so that you align for the best frequency match. I also feel that some of these babies today are coming in with what we could call clear karmic paths. So they're kind of coming in and being like, you got to clean up your shit so that I can maintain this clear karmic path when I come through. And I'm not going to take a lot of what you haven't worked on or your family hasn't worked on or your ancestral line so that I don't have to do so much of the heavy lifting. And so inviting or ushering the mother to clear out her shit too. There are also multiple timelines that we have the potential to live by. I mentioned this in some previous Akashic record readings. If you haven't listened to the Akashic record readings, the monthly soul nourishment readings, I highly recommend you go check them out because there's lots of little gems, no matter what month, that our guides provide for us and some teachings. One was this concept around traversing timelines and jumping timelines. Even this makes sense quantumly. Like we have multiple potential timelines that we can live by. And depending on actions, energetic orientation, and your personal ascension process, one can jump timelines. And my preliminary understanding is that these next generation of beings are shifting us into different timelines. Part of what they're here to do is to shift humanity into a higher timeline, so to speak. So the shadow work is like accelerated healing work. I found this to be my case because being led to various healers and addressing old issues at a really rapid rate during pregnancy, it just was like putting it in turbo mode. In my case, it's been physical healing and energy clearing and release work through the body, also brain rewiring and retraining. That has been the most prominent work, as well as work in my partnership, like my relationship with my partner. And a lot of that is also in my chart, like my natal chart. Karmically, I'm supposed to do that work, but it really was just like amplified. And I'm not even a parent yet. Parents tell me that this like is even more so once, you know, these little beings come earthside and then they start reflecting back to you in their little mirrors. So obviously this process will continue, but that's just a little bit about my own experience of really engaging with shadow work during this pregnancy journey. Okay, so I hope that wasn't too hodgepodgey, and I know I was jumping around. I just had a lot of different questions. I wanted to make sure that I spoke into all of them and share my personal experience and my story. And I hope that it's been helpful for you in any way. Again, all resources that I mention will be linked up in the full show notes, which you can find on my website, wildlyrooted.com/podcast. The specific link to this particular episode will be available in the, like, whatever podcast app you follow. If there's one that you can click on the actual links using your podcast app, you can click the link to go directly to that page, that dedicated page. If there was a resource that, you know, you couldn't take notes or you just want to lean into a little bit more and engage with. Honestly, there is just so much to say about this process. My journey's not even over yet. Obviously, I haven't had baby yet. So maybe after baby comes and I go through the birthing initiation process and through postpartum and la cuarentena, that I can come back and speak to, you know, my experience with that. And once again, engage with your questions and really to see how so much of what I had experienced and utilized as preparation, how that all might have influenced my birth experience. Although, again, I know I mentioned this before, but I have to say that I really feel it's important when you engage with all of these things that it's about the present moment and it's about what feels most aligned to you, and not because you're striving for a specific outcome. One thing that I have learned so much through this process and from others, like others sharing their story and really seeing their experience of pregnancy and birth and parenthood, is the surrendering process, and how you can plan all you want. You could do all the right things and still, life can throw major curveballs, and that birth is not about you, although you are a big part of the birthing process and being this beautiful vessel and channel as a birther to usher a soul in, and how they're in your field and connected to you. It's not just about you. You don't have control over the outcome. So I say that to also say that to myself too, right? As a reminder. And that I think this is just a microcosmic aspect of life. Like, we can do all the things, but we really don't have control over outcomes in life. We can only show up with full presence and in alignment and with deep, beautiful intentions in our heart. And that is the work that we're here to do, and really to embody and express love. So with that, I just want to say thanks for sticking with me if you're here all the way at the end. And I really hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, or also resources that you love, if there are things that you found have been really helpful for you or are helpful right now, I would love to hear about them. You can connect with me on Instagram over at @wildlyrooted, or you can shoot us an email. And I might not respond because I'm in maternity leave right now, but be sure that I receive all messages, and I would love to share what you have to say in your medicine, in your wisdom, with others as well. All right, that's what I have for you with this Wild Pregnancy Journey series. I'm sending you so much love and blessings, and stay tuned for December's Akashic Soul Nourishment reading next week when we dive into that. Bye, y'all. Hey there, I made something for you. One of the biggest challenges that I hear from people is that they are feeling stuck when it comes to their health. You're a smart, capable, and creative change maker, right? And you know what you should be doing for your health. So what gives? Well, it's not about willpower. And I wanted to create something that would help you to unlearn the things that are keeping you stuck, so that you can get out of your own way and master the mindset of health. That's why I created Wildly Unstuck, where you'll learn the top 5 things that I have found to sabotage your health goals and what to do about them. You'll learn what it really takes to become committed and unstoppable when it comes to your health goals, and find the clarity you've been looking for, so you know exactly what to do to get back into alignment. And I made it totally free. So if this is something that you want to dive into and create a vision and soul goals for your health and your life, and bring your gifts to the world, because we know that we need it, then I invite you to join us in Wildly Unstuck. You can find that at wildlyrooted.com/unstuck. I'll see you on the other side.